I'll just have to get some power. Otherwise, we might be running out of presentation. Is that good? Great. So good morning to you. How are you doing? Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, Worktech, for inviting me. It's a privilege to be here. I would just want to share with you some key insights from the book, which for me has been an extraordinary, very long journey, which has sort of really transformed me, I think, as a person. I want to share with you 2 case histories, and I would just like to talk at the end about some sort of 6 key principles, which I think are very important of how we think about these particular issues and topics going forward. I want to start with the question why, which is really where I started. And there was a guy called Tony Judd, who sadly died, very famous social and political historian, who said in his book, Ill Fares the Land, why is it that we find it so difficult to imagine a different type of society? Why is it that we find it so hard to conceive a different set of arrangements that could make all of our daily lives and the way that we live our lives and the organisations we live in so much better? And really, this is what this project is about. I start with the fact that we're in transition from an industrial society to a different type of society. But what do I mean by an industrial society? Well, I think it's a whole ideology of how we think we work, how we think organisations function. We talk about scaling up. We talk about a Fordist approach to how we manufacture and what we make, what we take, and how we market that in the world. We talk about mass consumption and mass consumers, who are actually, each and every one of you in this room becomes a mass. You don't become an individual. And it has a particular process from actually the battery farming of our kids to actually, as I said, how we run our organisations and our world, to what I call a non-linear world, where actually there is a completely different set of arrangements of how we can think of what our future could look like. So what do I mean by that? How do I explain the difference? Well, I'll tell you a very simple story. I've got a friend of mine. He's an American guy, and a few years ago, he decided that he would take his kids on a journey through Europe. And he decided the way that he would do that would be on a train. So the children said to him, "Dad, this would be a great opportunity for you to read the Harry Potter stories." So my friend, thinking he would become a man of the 21st century, decided he would buy himself an iPod, buy the audio files of Harry Potter, load them onto his iPod, and as they travelled for 2 weeks through Europe on the train, he would listen to them. At the end of the 2 weeks, he comes down for breakfast, and he says, "Good morning, children." "Good morning, Dad. So how did you get on with Harry Potter?" He went, "Well, come on, let's face it, Harry Potter's a bit rubbish." And they went, "Well, what do you mean, Dad?" He said, "Well, you know, the plot's all over the place, the characters come and go, I can't make head nor tail of it." So they said, "Well, let's have a look at your iPod." So they looked at his iPod and they looked at each other and they started to laugh. And they looked at the dad and they started to laugh more, and my friend started to get very upset. And he said, "Well, what's so funny?" And they said, "Dad, you spent 2 weeks listening to Harry Potter on shuffle." He didn't get this stuff, right? He had a particular way of how he thought the world worked. It's a simple story, but it's actually a really interesting one of the point that actually we have this capacity today to really do some transformational things. I talk about the fact that actually our world is faced today with a trilemma of social, organisational and economic problems, and they're all conjoined. And one of the problems is we'd like to separate these 3 things into separate boxes. And actually, when I was interviewed by Peter Day on the BBC recently, he picked up on this point where I said industrial organisations are inappropriate for the time that we live in. So if we think about our financial systems and what's happened to them and us as a consequence of that, whilst HSBC was laundering billions of dollars of drug cartel money, whilst Barclays was fixing the LIBOR rate, whilst we were in complete financial meltdown, whilst, in fact, you know, journalists felt it was okay to tap into the voicemails of murdered schoolgirls to sell newspapers to collect the quarterly numbers for advertising revenue, points to me that this is actually not a polemic, but a truth. We see the struggles with how we manage large-scale organisations like the NHS. These are real challenges for all of us in the future ahead and today as I speak. And as a consequence of actually how we've been asked to live our lives, I think that we as a humanity has been damaged dramatically, psychologically, spiritually, and in fact materially, by the way that the last 30 years we've constructed our world and the way that we've asked to be in it. Okay, a bit depressing. It gets better from here. John Stuart Mill in 1859, in writing on liberty, said, you know, human nature is not built like a machine, to do the work like a model. He is in fact, or she is in fact, like a tree, that we recognize them all as the same, but they are all unique by the inward forces that make them a living thing. Now, we are multidimensional. We're extraordinary people. We're an extraordinary species. And so what I think is happening, and what I see, is that we as a humanity are seeking an upgrade to what I call the human operating system. So what does this human operating system want? Well, it wants greater opportunity, greater freedom, greater power, greater empowerment, greater mutualism. You know, our linear world, our industrial world, was not built on mutualism. Business was the more I win and the more you lose, that's good business. Whereas what we see is an incredibly increasing trend where mutualism plays an important role, where diversity is respected, because actually nature's default setting is based on diversity. And the more we create a monoculture for humanity, the less we are going to thrive, because in fact we are part of nature. We want greater efficiency, greater independence, and God forbid, we might want a bit more beauty. Now by that, Jeremy, I don't mean that blue this year is going to be more important than red. What I mean is beautifully designed systems, beautifully designed organizations, beautifully designed architecture, beautifully designed ways in which we can organize and come together and get stuff done. That's what I mean by the aesthetics of beauty and the aesthetics of design. Now, if we're thinking about human beings, communication is really important. Where does the root word communication come from? It comes from the word communion. Coming together, sharing together, and transcending together. This is actually from the Shetland Islanders, the Up-Helly-R Festival, the Festival of Lights, where in fact these Shetland Islanders build this life-size Viking boat collectively in the Viking shed, and then once a year take it down to the sea, set it on fire, and then they have a great big party, and you might find the odd burly Viking in the ditches on your way home in the morning. The point is that they have co-created this experience. And part of my work was really interested in trying to understand this kind of algorithm, this challenge, I plus we equals y. Because in fact, context and meaning is created through the webs of relationships that we have as human beings with each other and everything around us. And actually how we derive value out of those relationships and connections is central to us as human beings. Cooperation, said Erik Erikson, is central to human development, in that we learn to be together before we actually can be able to stand apart as an individual. It is no accident that the socially orientated network communications membrane that we are wrapping around the earth is happening because actually humanity wants it. Technology only succeeds when it meets fundamental human needs. One of the crises that we have in the 21st century is the crisis of meaning. How do we create meaningful connection? And how do we therefore make meaningful identity as a consequence of that? And that is actually driving this huge technological revolution that we are watching at the moment. But we're also, on the other hand, having the capacity to rearrange our world at an atomic level. So when we think about how we make stuff, where stuff gets made, is also having a profound impact. We can change the shape of our world now, and we demand that our world is changed for us as human beings to be able to thrive in that world in whichever industry we're in, because we as a humanity are seeking something else. So my first example of actually all of that driving extraordinary change through work in economics and for us as people is a company called Local Motors. Now, the guy that founded this company, his grandfather ran the Indian motorcycle for many years, and he said, my grandfather gave him the disease, the love of all things on 2 or 4 wheels with an engine in it. But Jay grew up in Detroit, or in fact Flint, Michigan. This is the Packard plant, built in 1912 by Albert Kahn, the first time that reinforced concrete was ever used in the mass-scale manufacture of a factory. It's a 40-acre site, and today, and I apologize if there are any Americans in the room, but I describe Detroit as a third world country and a first world one, because the motor industry completely failed to adapt to a changing economic climate. This is the result of what happens. And of course, the devastation of that is, I don't really care about the factory. I care about the men and the women, their sons and their daughters, their livelihoods, all of that just falling apart because actually this was unable to adapt to a changing world. So Jay said, I want to do something about that. I want to be able to create a car company that is going to be relevant for the world we live in today. He looked at competition, large-scale competition. On the left-hand side, there is the picture of a Reba Prize. You know, the Royal Institute of British Architects is the most prestigious architectural prize in the world. And actually, that innovation is not done in an R&D lab. That's done in the workplace. That's done for real. And he also said, I'm also looking at mass collaboration, where people who are passionate about particular topics, in this instance a company called Topcoder, can come together to actually write algorithms for really hard to crack problems. In this instance, for NASA. There's a whole insight which is actually around when you bring people who are passionate, that want to and you create a competitive environment, you can accelerate innovation and really bring extraordinary things to bear. So they created a competition around specific design and vehicle problems. And that actually, over a very short period of time, evolved into this incredible automotive innovation platform called the Forge. Anywhere in the world, people could come together. And they created a community of practice. There's no money on the table at this point. It's just about how and why, thinking about what John Stuart Mill talked about in terms of what makes us human beings, why people would want to come and do this, and not for the money. This is the first car. It's called a Rally Fighter. You may or may not like it, depending on whether you're male or female, or whether you're interested in P-51 Mustang fighters. But the interesting thing is this was completely co-designed by a community of people. And there's a little red ring there around a little silver disc. That has the name of the gentleman that the community voted to come up with the best design for that vehicle for no money. And he was a student working for the Pasadena Arts College in the US. So when he went for his first job and they said, oh, so let's have a look at your concept cars, he says, I don't need one, I've got one I've built. There's many, many different reasons why we would want to collaborate at high intensity levels with each other. In fact, they have become so good at what they do that BMW are now collaborating with this little company called Local Motors. And Jay said to me, you know, when we first started doing this, BMW weren't interested. You know, we were the flies on the cow's back. Then the Pentagon came to them. They said, we want to run a competition where we want to co-design and prototype a rapid response off-road vehicle. This was co-designed and built in 3.5 months. Can you imagine the MOD? Right? And they're even collaborating with Domino's Pizzas, the ultimate pizza delivery vehicle. Now, it might look on the surface look a bit funny, but actually they're investigating into clean technology, into battery and lithium batteries and hydrogen fuel cells. So there's a really serious innovation platform around the whole aspects of automotive innovation design. People that are putting their down payments for their Local Motors cars are, in fact, can see each other as a community using the open APIs on Google Maps. So they're actually building a community in a very different type of way, meaningful human connection. All of the designs that are created through all of these competitions, and they go right down to nuts on the cars, are released under a Creative Commons license. If you don't know, Creative Commons is an alternative copyright platform that actually is not based on you can't use this, but actually I allow you to share this knowledge and information in a variety of different ways. And again, there is great insight, in fact, that sharing and mutualism can really stimulate the diversity within an economic industry, or within an industry economically, rather than locking it down. And on the other hand, they're using 3D printing in their factories. 3D fabrication tools and 2D milling capability. Their factories have been voted by Jalopnik, along with the Tesla factories, in the top 10 most adaptive and impressive factories in the world. And when you buy your Rally Fighter, it is mandatory that you go and build your Rally Fighter with a mechanical tutor. So over 6 days, you come together with this tutor and you build your Rally Fighter. The reason is that people embrace what they create. If you have created that car, if you built that car, that's become part of you. It's about how we create meaningful human connection. And it means that you're far less likely to default on your down payments because it actually belongs to you in a very different type of way. So what are the lessons that I think come out of this particular story? Well, when you think about whole systems design, when you really step back, if you're really thinking about innovation, you have the ability, therefore, to start to actually build performance and capability in a very different type of way. But you have to see the problem from a whole systems perspective. And far too often, we don't do that within organizations, however small or large they are. Because our industrial way of thinking is that we must think in boxes and silos. So we think as an ecology. How do we create a different type of industrial ecology? They collaborated in their first year with 44,000 designers and 3,600 engineering innovators. You can't afford to employ that many people inside your organization to deliver that level of innovation. And they can build cars 5 times faster at 100 times less the capital cost. This is radical redesign of a business and a way that an industry can operate and function. And of course, this constant flow of information and knowledge through this distributed network of people around the world means that actually they become the learning organization. So learning is not something that they do once a year. Learning is now an iterative process that constantly runs through the fabric of the company, meaning that it's actually always able to be on the cutting edge and to be able to think about how it adapts to its world around it. And the micro factories, so he doesn't want to build a Packard plant, they're building micro factories around America because it's local jobs and local lives and local people, where they have a far less dramatic impact than what the Packard plant in Detroit did when it was built 100 or so years ago. The second story I want to tell you about is about the Nova Scotia Public Health Care. And this is all about the fact that, as it says here, our best possible future lies in the minds of the many that already work within or touch an organization. It's a process that is in fact called participatory leadership. So the idea is that rather than, let's say, I'm going to tell all of you people that actually in the next 5 minutes I want you to jump up and run out that door at the back, and you think, well, why would you do that? We're going to consult each other, share our knowledge and information and insights in a way that allows us to become aware of actually what it is we could or should be doing and the context in which we're in. And the reason why this little sketch is up here is because, in fact, it's about and showing how people are coming together to work with each other. Now, participatory leadership is not a love-in. There's a lot of door slamming. It's very uncomfortable. It's very painful. But the reality is it relates to the fact that you are co-creating and are part of a change in the way you're going to get stuff done. And they talk about this root question, what is our purpose? And through actually investigating this one question, they talk about how they build shared awareness and actually how this group can actually start to do these things. Now, The lady that runs the Nova Scotia healthcare system, a lady called Janet Brownstein Moody, and we spoke on the phone, said to me, I'm older than you, Alan, and if I've worked in the healthcare industry all my life, if you had told me 3 years ago that today we can co-budget the entire Nova Scotia healthcare budget collectively, that we can create and pass legislation and pass it within 4 hours, I never would have believed you. We see people as individuals that have never previously would have been identified as leaders grow into these incredible people because they all feel they have collective ownership of the journey in which they're on, because they've all come to agree that this is the shared reality we have in this organisation. It is completely counterintuitive to the way, in fact, that our NHS, for example, has been transformed by some very clever people who are now telling us what to do. And as you all know, you always will give your creative best when you feel that you are truly committed with your heart to actually solve and be part of changing a problem. So Nova Scotia in 3 years has gone through profound organisational systems change through this process of collaborative and participatory leadership, where there is absolutely no other technology involved other than how we come together as human beings and organise ourselves. Faster alone, they say, but further together. So why is that relevant to you? Well, I think that participatory leadership has this ability to harness collective intelligence. If you have people working 20 years, 10 years, 5 years inside your organisation, they have deep knowledge about your organisation. It doesn't matter who it is. And that actually, the ability to use this process helps to unlock that knowledge, to allow you to use it for the collective purpose of how that organisation could change. And as you all know in this room, if you've ever gone through any type of real type of change inside large organisations, the biggest stumbling block to making that change happen is cultural. People resist the change. They're fearful of change. It's purpose-driven. And as a friend of mine once said to me, purpose is the hidden leader. So, at the end of my book and my story, I talk about these 6 principles, which are, I think, design principles, but I think they're also navigational guide principles that could maybe help us as existing organisations think about how we deal with a world that is non-linear, that is complex, that is challenging. And the first one is ambiguity. How do we deal with a complex world? And what we need to do is we need to think in whole systems. It's a bit difficult to read, and I apologise for that, but I wanted to show it to you because actually this comes from a friend of mine who's a director of the World Food Programme in the Sudan. And when they're trying to work out how they deal with the forced migration of 500,000 people from north to south, in amongst a lot of fighting, in amongst the monsoon season and all the rest of it, they actually have to really start to look at the dynamics of the entire economic, agricultural, political, climate-wise context to enable them to start to think about how they're going to apply their limited resources in the best possible way. It's just a form of practice that we should all become very capable of doing. We need to think in systems. The second one is adaptiveness, to learn to be adaptive. Now, this is for me about collaborating, critiquing, communicating, and creating inside an organisation. This language up here actually comes from the language of Local Motors. I took the key words that define that company: open APIs, open source, participatory tools, community, Creative Commons, participatory cultures, competition, co-creation, design, engineering, risk mitigation. This is not the normal language of a car company. And so if you can't evolve the language of how you describe your organisation, and if you can't evolve that language to describe the destination that you want to get to, you'll never get there. So that ability to be able to build patterns and be able to see those patterns within your systems thinking allows you to think very deeply and more richly about how you're going to innovate and be part of the future of the world that we want to create. The third principle is openness. So openness for me is open to new ideas, an open culture, open innovation, open data, open society, open source. It's about actually this idea really of diversity. But openness is a very different way of how we think organisations work than previously in an industrial context where they were very tight and very closed. The fourth one is participatory cultures and tools. Of course, all of you in this room will be well aware of the word social media. I have a problem with the word social media, but I'm very excited about the idea of participatory cultures. And hopefully, in the short time I have with you today, through the true stories I've showed you with a manufacturing company and a healthcare company, their profound and very wise use of participatory cultures has brought transformational change for two very different industries. The fifth one is craftsmanship. Now, I've spent my entire life, in many ways, living a creative life. So this speaks very clearly to me. But I think it's very important for all of us. One is that we all need people to be makers. And some key points about craftsmanship is the craftsman is, or woman is always in beta. You are always open to new ideas. You're always playing with new things. It's got a process called adjacency. If I bring that thing together, and I bring that thing together, and I put them together like this, what happens? It's how you learn to create the new. It's about play. And of course, through failure as well as play, you don't become a master craftsman, a master violinist, whatever it is, just like that. It requires an enormous amount of practice. And a committed or an engaged craftsman is a committed craftsman. Ergo, an engaged workforce is a committed workforce. Look at Local Motors. Look at Nova Scotia. So therefore, if you can inculcate a culture of craftsmanship inside your organisation, which means you need to create some room for that to happen, you will start to have a very different type of culture in that organisation that could be massively empowering. The craftsman also asks his or herself, is what I create for the collective good? Is what I create of huge value to society? And I think that is a question that you should all be asking yourselves, because I see far too many organisations now which are not ultimately delivering to the collective good. Our industrial revolution, although we have our dark satanic mills and all the rest of it, ultimately delivered extraordinary things for all of us as human beings across the world. And I think we're at a point which is as important as the industrial revolution, and how our organisations are going to play a role in that is extremely important. The last one is epic. Any of you have got kids in this room and you watch your children play games, your children seek an epic win when they play whatever game it is. They go on a quest. And all of the stories and work that I've done in those straight lines, you know, whether it's the Nova Scotia healthcare system, whether it's in manufacturing or finance, all of these organisations have not accepted the status quo, and they've designed for transformational change. They have sought an epic win. And so my challenge for you in this room is what is going to be your epic win? How can you bring transformational change that is good for your organisation, but is equally, and more importantly, I think, better for all of us collectively, because that is how we create a better future. So I argue that we have the ability to transform our world that can be better for us as individuals, better for us therefore socially, where we can create organisations that perform in completely different types of ways if we think about their design properly, and we can create a vibrancy of economics for which the Industrial Revolution was once famous for. Thank you very much.